Chapter 16. Farid. Sara had no idea how they were supposed to do this. It wasn't hard to know where they needed to go. The sounds of the battle waging at the wall gave them the direction. But once the Mongols breached the city, how would Dak and Sara get close to Hulagu? Especially with Gokon there. They needed some kind of disguise. Hulago had epilepsy, Dak said. Sometimes Sara found it hard to fake interest in Dak's random trivia. I don't really see how that fact is particularly useful right now. It might be, Dak said. One of my facts just got us out of that prison cell. Sara didn't have the energy to argue with him. Fine, Dak, fine. They walked down empty streets that had been completely choked with people and camels only a few days before. It seemed like everyone had either fled the city or were hiding inside their houses. What's been bothering you? Dak asked. What do you mean? Sara asked. Come on, dude. You know what I mean. They'd been friends forever. Of course Dak would know that something was wrong. A heaviness fell over Sara, and she took a deep breath. Okay. Okay, what? Okay, I'll tell you. She stopped in the street and turned to face him. But this is a secret between you and me, understand? What level of security clearance? He chuckled. Remember, like when we used to? I'm serious, Dak. He tipped his head downward, looking at the ground. Sorry. Okay. Then he looked back up, his smile gone. What is it? Sara paused another moment to make sure he wasn't about to crack another joke. I saw the cataclysm during a warp. Dak's eyebrows lifted. What do you mean? Like, you saw it? Yes. It was real. Sara closed her eyes, trying to push away the images rising up in her memory. I was there. How? It was when I warped away with Ilsa. I hadn't meant to, but I went to the future. Wow. Dak shook his head. I don't know what to say. That's big. Why didn't you say anything until now? Because it was bad. Really, really bad. We may have fixed a bunch of breaks, but the world is still going to be destroyed. As much as we've managed to get right, it isn't nearly enough. I guess I just didn't want to burden you guys with that. Dak nodded, frowning a little. But there's something else, isn't there? Sara ran her fingers through her hair. Yes, there's something else. She felt her throat tightening just thinking about what she was going to say. Saying it made it real. But she wasn't going to cry. No tears. I saw my parents. They're alive? Yes, Sara said. No tears. No. They died in the cataclysm. I don't understand. I think something we did saved them, one of the breaks we fixed, but it's not enough. If I want to really save them, I have to stop the cataclysm. You mean we have to stop the cataclysm? Dak said. We're in this together. Sara inhaled sharply. I know. Dak smiled at her, and for a moment it felt like they were back home in their tree, back before they knew anything about historians or breaks, back before all of this started. Hey, he said, I just thought of something. Your parents might be there in the present, right now. That means you might get to see them when we go back to get a new square. That did it. Sara couldn't stop the tears after that. She cried, and Dak apologized, but it wasn't his fault. Sara had already had that same thought many, many times. It made her so happy she almost couldn't stand it. It was too much. Dak put his arms around her and pulled her into a tight hug that lasted a couple of moments, just the right amount of time before he let her go. We're going to save them, he said. And we're going to save my parents, too. We're going to save the whole world. Sara cleared her throat and wiped the tears from her cheeks on her sleeve. Right. That's what we're going to do. So let's do it. Dak looked around. I think the Persian Tower is that way. He pointed down the road. "That's where Hulago will come into the city." "Then that's where we should go," Sera said. They set off down the street, the sounds of the battle echoing around them, sounding closer to Sera with every step. They did pass other people occasionally in the street, but the strangers avoided them and hurried by. A short while later, they came to an intersection towered over by another of the large archways. As they drew closer to it, they saw a man pacing back and forth beneath it, and they soon recognized him. It was Farid, the rug merchant who'd helped them escape the market inspector. When he saw them, he lifted his hands toward them. "Little Pirashki, is it you?" "It's us, Farid," Sera said. "What are you—"
"Oh, I'd almost given up hope. The man and the woman said you would come, but then you didn't come, and I began to doubt my memory of their instructions. I feared I had been waiting in the wrong place."
"A man and woman?" A chill raced down Dak's back.
"Yes," Farid said. 2 days ago they came to me and gave me 10 whole dinar. 10! And told me to wait here for you. They said you would be coming this way, and I was to give you shelter."
Sera gasped. "Dak, your parents." "I know," Dak said. "They were here."
"So come, little Parashki, come!"
Farid led them away from the archway.
"We will go somewhere safe to wait until this is all over."
But they didn't have time. They couldn't wait until it was over. "Farid," Sera said. "We appreciate your concern for us," Dak said, butting in. He leaned in close to Sera and whispered, "We have to trust my parents, okay?" Sera thought about it and agreed. Of course they had to trust Dak's parents. So they followed Farid down several streets that twisted and turned, narrowed and widened, until they came to a modest-looking building.
"My home,"
he said. He unlocked the door and ushered them inside. The room was dim, but Sera's eyes quickly adjusted. They were in a kind of entryway, and Farid led them across it to another door, which opened onto a small, square courtyard. Plants grew in large pots in all the corners, and each of the 4 walls had a doorway. Staircases climbed up the walls to doorways on the second story. For as many rooms as the home had, it seemed to Sera that there should be more people there. "Do you have a family, Farid?" Sera asked. He nodded, noticeably calmer since they had gotten off the street.
"Yes, I do. But I sent them away from the city the moment I learned the Mongols were coming."
"Why didn't you leave with them?" Dak asked.
"I could not leave my home, or my rugs," Farid said. "Besides, I'm sure the city will survive. The Caliph knows best, and Baghdad's walls are strong. The Mongols will give up this siege and move on."
Dak said. "We sure hope so, but it might be smart to prepare for the worst, just in case."
"I am prepared. I have food and water to last me. Are you hungry?"
Actually, Sera was feeling pretty hungry after a few days of eating nothing but the food they'd been given in their prison cell. "Yes, I think we're both hungry."
"What would you like?"
Farid asked.
"Nothing is cooked, but I have breads, olives, fruit, cheeses."
"Cheeses?" The excitement in Dak's voice made Sera smile.
"Yes,"
Farid said.
"Come, we will eat, and then you will rest."
Farid's food was delicious, and his hospitality and friendliness put Sera at ease. She was almost able to forget they were basically sitting in the middle of a war zone. Sera didn't know what she and Dak were supposed to be doing there, or how long they should stay, but she decided to wait a little while to see what developed. Dak had no trouble settling in. Aside from the cheeses, Sera thought being here probably made him feel closer to his parents, because he was where they had wanted him to be. As dusk arrived, and Farid lit a few oil lamps, Sera decided that she and Dak should at least spend the night. If their purpose in being here wasn't obvious by the next day, they could leave and get back to figuring out how to fix the break on their own. She fell asleep easily in the comfortable bed Farid prepared for her, and woke up the next day after a deep and restful sleep. She'd even slept through the sounds of the Mongol assault. "This is the 5th day," Dak said next to her. That meant in 2 more days, Hulagu would be there. "What should we do?" Dak asked. "I don't know," Sara said. "Last night, I thought we should leave today." But lying there in her comfortable bed and already looking forward to breakfast, Sara had second thoughts. "We can't talk to Hulagu until he's in the city. There's no way we can get to him now." "So you think we should wait?" Dak asked. "It seems like that's what your parents wanted us to do." "I was thinking the same thing." Sara let her eyes close again. "Then let's wait." That day and the next came and went. Sara and Dak ate. They slept. Fareed told them wonderful stories to try to distract them, and they played chess. But the whole time Sara worried about Rick, and with the distant sounds of the Mongol army, she never felt at ease. On the morning of the 7th day of the siege, Sara woke up feeling especially anxious. This was the day Hulagu would take the Persian tower and move into the city. Sara and Dak still had to find a way to get to him. It was time for them to leave. "Wake up, Dak." She shook him. His eyes stayed closed. "No." "Dak, we need to get going." "Why?" "We have a break to fix." "I think we should stay here until we know what my parents wanted us to do," Dak said. "But we don't know how long that will take," Sara said. "And besides, your parents aren't thinking about the breaks. They're thinking about you, and we don't have a lot of time." "I know, but—" A pounding on the front door echoed through the whole house, followed by the sound of a man's voice shouting, "Fareed! Rug merchant!" Sara and Dak got to their feet and walked out of their room into the courtyard. Fareed was already at the front door. He looked back and motioned for them to step aside, out of view. Fareed opened the door.
"Ah, Market Inspector, what an unexpected honor to have you at my home."
Market Inspector? But he was SQ. How had he found them here? This could not be happening, Sara thought. Not after they had finally escaped the Grand Vizier.
"Spare me your flattery," the Market Inspector said. "You know why I have come."
Chapter 17. Little Pirashki. Dak tried to control the panic rising up inside him. The Market Inspector was here. He had tracked them down. Or had Fareed betrayed them? Dak didn't want to believe that, not when his parents were the ones who had made sure he ended up here.
"I apologize," Fareed said, "but I do not know why you have come." "I've come to confiscate your rugs," the inspector said. "Confiscate? My rugs? But why?" "They are needed by Hulagu Kahn."
The inspector's voice sounded just as snobby and annoying as Dak remembered it.
"He who will shortly breach the city. There is a palace being prepared for him on the eastern side of town, and for this palace, we need rugs. Your rugs." "I am happy to offer my rugs to Hulagu Kahn," Fareed said. "Give me some time to prepare them." "We'll be back in 1 hour," the Market Inspector said. "Have them ready."
The front door shut, and Fareed came back into the courtyard. Dak and Sara stepped out from their hiding place.
"That scoundrel!"
Fareed punched the palm of his hand.
"My rugs! For that warlord?"
"Actually," Sara said. Dak turned to look at her. She had that look in her eyes, the one she got when she was about to solve a great big math problem. "Do you need a couple of carpet inspectors?" she asked. "One more time?" Dak saw where she was going, and it was perfect. Before the Market Inspector returned, Fareed helped them get rolled up in 2 carpets and loaded onto a cart with the rest of the rugs going to Hulagu Khan's new palace. He hitched a donkey up to the cart, and it just so happened that its rear end sat right in front of Dak's carpet. like inches away from his face, and, of course, he couldn't move his face to escape it. What was it with beasts of burden in this break?
"Are you sure about this, little Piroshki?"
Farid asked. He sounded really nervous to Dak. "We're sure, Farid," Dak said. Maybe he could wiggle his hand up to plug his nose if he needed to. "Thank you for everything, Farid," Sara said. "I hope the 10 dinar is enough."
10 dinar?
Farid laughed.
That's a small fortune. But I would have helped you children for nothing. You are good, and the market inspector is bad, and I wish I knew why you were doing this.
"We told you," Sara said.
"And it's a secret no one else can know." "Ah, your story about the djinn and the ring that can move through time."
"Yes," Dak said. His story had sounded better when he told it the second time, to Farid. They had been trying to find a way to explain their mission.
"Well, do not be offended," Farid said. "But a children's story like that does little to reassure me."
"Trust us," Sara said. Shh," Farid said.
"The market inspector comes."
They fell silent, and a few moments later, the market inspector's voice came from right beside the cart.
"Well done, rug merchant," he said. "You have made the right decision." "Allow me to transport my wares to the great Khan's palace?"
Farid asked.
"Certainly," the market inspector said. "I shall accompany you."
A moment later, the donkey brayed, and the cart lurched forward, tipping and rocking along the road. Dak stayed as motionless and silent as he could. He could almost feel Sara inside her rug, next to him. The cart moved slowly, so slowly it began to drive Dak crazy. He didn't like not being able to see outside. He didn't like not knowing what was going on. But after what felt like forever, the cart rocked to a stop, and the market inspector cleared his throat.
"Hulagu Kahn appreciates your offering, rug merchant," he said. "For it, you shall be spared. You may stay here following the siege, where you will be safe from the pillaging to come." "Thank you,"
Farid said. That actually made Dak feel good. By helping them, perhaps Farid had helped himself.
"Leave the rugs here," the market inspector said. "I'll have someone attend to them."
Uh-oh. That would not be good.
I could take care of that,"
Farid said. He sounded a little flustered. Was it enough to make the market inspector suspicious?
"I find pleasure in seeing the places my rugs will be enjoyed, you see."
The market inspector was silent. Dak waited.
"Very well," the market inspector said. "That will save me the trouble. They are intended for Hulagu Khan's reception hall." "Excellent!"
Farid clapped his hands.
"The more people to see my rugs." "Yes, indeed."
The market inspector sounded like he had already lost interest in the rugs.
"Carry on. I have important work to attend to, but I shall be back to examine them, and if I find any of them to be lacking in quality, I shall be very displeased. I maintain a very high standard in the markets of Baghdad, and for the Khan." "Yes, Mutasib,"
Farid said. There was silence for a long time, and then Dak heard Farid sigh.
"I'm taking you both straight into the lion's den," he said. "I feel like I should ask you to forgive me."
Over the next little while, Farid loaded the rugs, one by one, into Hulagu's new palace. That meant there were several periods where he was gone, and Dak and Sara were alone in the cart, hoping no one stopped to examine the rugs. They didn't dare whisper to each other, even though they wanted to. Eventually, Farid came back and said,
"All right, up we go."
Dak felt him hoist Sara away from him, out of the cart, with a grunt.
"My, what a heavy rug,"
Farid said then, chuckling. Dak smiled, Then he was alone. Really alone. He tried to ignore the donkey rear taking up his vision and pictured instead where they might be, their surroundings. Maybe they were in the street. Maybe they were in a courtyard. He tried to imagine what was going on, where his parents might be, where they had gone after they'd given the dinars to Farid. Were they already ahead of them at the next break? Dak started wondering what that might be too. Where would they go, and what would they see? His thoughts felt like a runaway train sometimes, just completely unstoppable. He heard footsteps returning and braced himself to be lifted in the air. A voice said. "One rug left." Oh no! No, this could not be happening! Dak sucked in a breath. It was the market inspector! "You there! Guard!" the market inspector shouted. "Come move this rug inside so we can clear this cart from the courtyard. I don't want it here when Hulagu Kahn arrives." Where was Farid? Dak began to really panic now. "Yes, Mutasib," another man said. His footsteps came closer. "Okay, stay calm." Dak would just go limp, become one with the rug. Maybe the guy wouldn't notice. Maybe he'd just carry him right on inside. Dak relaxed every muscle in his body down to the tips of his fingers. He felt hands reach around him, and then a squeezing as the hands lifted him from the cart. "Oof," the guard said. "Heavy rock." "Excellent," the market inspector said. "A heavy rug is a high-quality rug. Farid really did bring his best. Gokon will be most pleased. The happier we keep Hulagu, the stronger our position. Take it inside to the audience hall." "Yes, Mutasib." Dak rolled and the world spun, and then he came to rest high up, probably on the guard's shoulder. As scared as Dak was, and as fast as his heart raced, he kept his body as loose as a noodle, bouncing a little with each of the guard's steps. Moments later, Dak heard voices up ahead. My rug!" That was Farid. "You did not have to bring it to me. I would have unloaded it myself." "The market inspector asked me." "The market inspector?" "Yes, but since you're here, would you mind taking it?" "Yes!" Farid shouted. "I mean, of course." Dak rolled again, downward, and came to rest at a lower spot. He could tell Farid held him now. "That's a high-quality rug," the guard said. "Thank you," Farid said. Dak heard the scuff of the guard's boot as he turned and walked away, the echo of his footsteps receding. "Pirashki?" Farid whispered. "I'm here," Dak whispered back. Farid sighed and carried Dak a little ways before setting him down. "We are alone," the rug merchant said, and unrolled Dak from the rug. As it opened up and spit Dak out, he kept rolling a couple of times, his legs and arms flopping. Then, between the stress and his desperate attempt to relax, all he could do was just lie there. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to move again," he said to himself. "Well, you'd better." He looked up at Sera. "Hulago will be here soon." Dak struggled to his feet, and for the next little while they helped Farid lay out the rugs, covering the floor of the audience hall. Dak got a look at his surroundings for the first time. The room was tall, with carved, blue-tiled pillars supporting a vaulted ceiling. High windows let light into the rafters, but left everything below in a soft glow. There were some pieces of wooden furniture along the walls, cabinets and chests, probably meant to hold the tributes and gifts sure to come Hulagu's way. At one end of the room stood a raised platform with an ornate, upholstered seat. Hulagu's throne. They were definitely in the right place, and almost at the right time. After that, and with a lot of reassurance, they eventually convinced Farid to leave them alone to wait. "I almost wish I could have seen it," Dak said. "What?" Sera asked. "The battle at the Persian Tower," Dak said. "It's an important moment in history." "A violent moment in history," Sera said. "No, thank you." Bad things happen, Dak said. Really bad things happen. I mean, just think about how many wars have been fought here in Baghdad. He shook his head. Ancient wars and modern wars. You'd think we could learn something from that and not keep making the same mistakes. I know bad things happen, Sara whispered. But I've seen enough wars now to know exactly what they're like, and I don't want to keep seeing them over and over. Maybe you're right, Dak said. Sara pointed over in a corner. There's an empty cabinet over there. I think we can hide inside it until the right time. Dak nodded. Sounds like a plan. Chapter 18. Hulagu Kahn. Sara and Dak hunkered close together inside the cabinet, waiting. It was musty-smelling and old. They knew it was only a matter of time now until Hulagu entered the city and took possession of his temporary palace. Only a matter of time until Sara and Dak had to step out and convince him somehow to spare the House of Wisdom. Listen to that, Dak said. The siege has ended. Sara cocked her ear. He was right. The sounds of battle had gone, and the city was quiet. Won't be long now, Dak said. Hulagu. He shook his head. Never mind. What? Sara asked. Nothing. He looked away. I was just going to annoy you with another historical fact. Sara felt a little stab of guilt over the way she'd been treating Dak. Sure, his historical babble annoyed her at times, but it was also something she liked about him, because it was part of what made Dak, Dak. I'm sorry for the way I've been treating you, she said. He looked up. Rick and I have been kind of ganging up on you. Normally I've always defended you, but I haven't been a very good best friend lately. That's okay, Dak said. You had the whole seeing your parents and the cataclysm thing to deal with. It's fine. We're good. Are you sure? Of course, Dak said. And I mean, I know I can be really annoying. I just can't stop it. You really like history, Sara said. And that's okay. That's you. A few minutes of silence passed. Then Sara asked, So, what was the fact you were going to tell me? Well, Dak grinned a little. It was that, but noises outside the cabinet cut him off. The clomp of many, many boots, and the din of many voices. It sounded like a wave rushing into the room. It settled all around them, and Sara opened the cabinet just a crack to look out. The room had filled with Mongols, and some people from Baghdad, too. They milled around, talking, waiting. Then, a short while later, they all fell silent at the same moment, and Sara knew that meant Hulagu had entered the room. Everyone dropped to the ground in a bow, and Sara saw him stride forward with wide, bow-legged steps. He wore flashing, gilded armor, with a jeweled helmet on his head and a jeweled sword at his waist. Behind him came a train of attendants, including Tusi. Hulagu climbed to his throne and sat down. The entire room stayed bowed as his imperious gaze swept across them. "You may rise," he said at last. What followed appeared to be some kind of ritual, where generals and warriors came forward and Hulagu praised them for doing something extraordinary on the battlefield. Then they exchanged gifts, and the gifts were almost always clothing of some kind. The fancier the item, the higher the honor, with some hats and coats appearing to be made entirely of gold thread and gemstones. So Hulagu gave gifts to his people, and the people gave gifts to Hulagu. "What's going on out there?" Dak asked. He couldn't see like she could. She tried to describe what she was seeing, and Dak nodded along, but she could tell he was frustrated. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I just want to know what's going on," he said. Sara smiled. That was very true of Dak. Everywhere they went, he was always trying to figure things out, and usually he did that by relating whatever was going on back to history in some way. "Okay," she whispered. willing to try harder for him. Now there's a guy giving Hulagu a long coat with a peacock embroidered on it, lots of silver thread. Dak sat back, listening, and this went on for a long time. So long, Sara actually started to get bored, and she yawned. "This could go on forever," she said. "What should we do?" "Keep waiting?" Sara didn't want to keep waiting. Everything depended on them getting this right. They'd planned to try to find a time when Hulagu would be alone, but that didn't seem to be happening any time soon. Maybe not at all. "I think we should do it now," she said. "Here?" Dak straightened. "In front of everybody?" "Yes," Sara said. Dak rubbed his head with both hands. Okay. Let's do it." Sara opened the cabinet door, and they slipped out of it. Everyone in the room was facing the Kahn, so nobody noticed them at first. They managed to glide along the wall, getting closer and closer to the throne. But then Sara made eye contact with a warrior, and he nudged the guy next to him, and that guy turned to stare. Then he tapped the guy in front of him, and that man shouted,
"You! What are you doing here?"
The attention of the entire room swiveled toward them, and everyone fell silent. Sara thought maybe this was a bad idea after all. Her stomach sank. Was this how Dak felt when one of his ideas didn't pan out the way he'd hoped?
"What is the meaning of this?"
Another man marched toward them with a very hard and menacing gait.
"Who let these children in?"
"I don't know, General Gokon,"
the warrior said, bowing.
"I just saw them creeping toward the Great Kahn."
So this was the Time Warden, Gokon. When he drew near, he recognized Dak immediately.
"So, you've come back," he said. "I appreciate prisoners who return to their cells. I see you now have the girl with you, but are missing the African. Where is he?"
"Defeating the Vizier as we speak," Dak said.
"I doubt that," Gokon said. "But you have disrupted an important ceremony."
His voice fell to a deep growl.
"So I will deal with you personally. Bring them here."
Sara, along with everyone in the room, turned toward the throne. Hulagu stood, staring at them, waiting. Gokon clearly felt torn. He obviously didn't want Sara and Dak anywhere near the Kahn, but Sara also figured he couldn't disobey Hulagu's order either.
"Yes, my lord," the general said.
He grabbed Sara and Dak by the arms, one in each hand, and dragged them forward until they stood before the throne. Sara dropped to her knees, bowing, and Dak did the same.
"What are you doing here?"
Hulagu asked.
"They are spies, Great Kahn," Gokon said. "Sent to assassinate you."
"Children?" Hulagu said. "Assassins?" "I think not," came a calm voice from the side of the throne. Sara looked up as Tusi stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. She was shocked. Was he actually sticking his neck out to help them? Tusi cleared his throat.
"My reading of the stars foretold an unexpected visit to your court, Great Kahn. What are these children if not unexpected? I believe they may be a portent, possibly sent to you for a reason known only to your gods. How you deal with them may have lasting importance to your reign."
Hulagu looked at Tusi.
"I see."
Tusi was helping them. He made eye contact with Sara, his expression unreadable. Angry? Sad? Frightened? He spoke again.
"I would like to consult the stars again, Great Kahn. I advise you take no action until I have had the opportunity to study the matter."
Hulagu returned to his throne.
"Very well. Your reading of the heavens has guided me true until this point. I shall put my trust in you again, Tusi."
Tusi bowed. "I am honored, Great Kahn. May I interview these children in private? Gokon's face burned red.
Great Kahn, I would urge—
Yes,
Hulagu said. You may interview them in private.
Tusi looked at the general, who released Sera and Dak as roughly as he had grabbed them.
With your leave, Great Kahn,
Tusi said. I will take them now.
Yes, yes,
Hulagu said.
Go.
Tusi bowed. He motioned for Sera and Dak to bow, which they did, and then they left the audience hall through a little side door. Tusi led them into an adjacent room, and after he had shut the door, he spun on them with rage that seemed barely controlled.
Do you know what you have done?
He asked. Sera felt herself withering, but recovered quickly. They had done nothing wrong. In fact, they were doing the exact right thing. It was Tusi who had made the wrong choices. We're doing what we have to, Sera said, to save the House of Wisdom.
Tusi groaned. What madness is this?
Forget the House of Wisdom. There is nothing you can do. But now you've come here and put your lives in danger,
and I foolishly stepped out to defend you, putting my life in danger as well.
We didn't mean to put your life in danger, Sera said. Yeah, Dak said. What's your problem? We didn't ask for your help.
The general would have made swift work of you if I had not intervened. Believe me, he was not pleased with your previous escape.
Dak smirked. No?
No. He executed the warriors who failed to guard you.
Oh. Dak's smile crumbled.
But that is not your fault,
Tusi said.
You simply have no idea the nature of the men you deal with. Gokon is merciless, and Hulagu does not see the world the way you do. You cannot reason with him.
But you can, Sera said. You could do something. Tusi made a fist and pressed it against his forehead.
I cannot. It is not my responsibility.
You're only thinking of yourself, Sera said. What about your responsibility to science, to knowledge? Those matter to the entire world. Don't you care about that? Tusi brought his hand down.
Of course I do.
His voice softened. Since you came to me at the war camp, I have not had a single restful night.
My doubts keep me awake. I have spent many hours wondering how I could convince the Kahn to keep his men out of the libraries, to spare them, but there is nothing I can say that will convince him.
I can think of something, Dak said. Sera turned toward him. So did Tusi. Hulagu obviously puts a lot of trust in the stars, right? So what do you need to study the stars?
Celestial globes,
Tusi said.
Charts, tables.
Right, Dak said. But what you really need is an observatory. And what does an observatory need? Sera saw where Dak was going, and it was brilliant. Tusi saw it too. Sera could tell because a smile broke unevenly across his face.
A library,
he whispered. Right, Dak said. You just need some books, and I happen to know a place where you can find lots of them. Chapter 19. A Dangerous Proposal. Dak was on a roll. First he'd busted them all out of that prison, and now he'd managed to convince Tusi to help them, and even given him the way to do it. Now Dak and Sera just had to sit back and let Tusi do his thing and convince Hulagu to build him an observatory stocked with books from Baghdad. We'll wait until the morning to approach the throne, Tusi said. I will consult the stars, but I already have a fairly good idea of what they will tell me. I bet that's usually the way you work, Dak said. Tusi shrugged. I am far more interested in predicting the motion of the stars than predicting events from those motions. The former is science, while the latter is nothing more than seeing what we want to see. Now, you should both get some rest. Dak had to admit he was pretty tired, so he and Sera nestled down on some cushions Tusi had a servant bring into the room. These Baghdad beds were growing on him. Who needed a mattress? Dak closed his eyes, and before long, he nodded off. Shouting startled him awake. He jumped up, only to feel someone grab him from behind in a bear hug, pinning his arms at his sides. "Let me go!" he roared, squirming. But it was no use. He was trapped. Dak looked to his side and saw that another man had Sera. General Gokon stood nearby. Tusi shook his fist at him. "You dare disobey the great Kahn?"
"I've had enough of your meddling, Tusi," Gokon said. "You may have Hulagu deceived by your superstitious pandering, but you and I both know you're a far more intelligent man than that. But you're also a survivor, and I actually respect that."
"Your respect means nothing to me," Tusi said. "And you know something of superstition yourself, don't you, divine man?" Dak heard sarcasm all over the way Tusi said the name.
"We both play our parts," Gokon said. "Go back to playing yours, as you do so well, and you might manage to survive once more. Leave the children to me."
"I can't do that," Tusi said. "They're children."
"And they are more dangerous than you realize."
Gokon fixed Dak with that same cold stare.
"You are right in that, Tusi, even though you don't understand why."
"You will release them now," Tusi said, "and we will take this matter up before the Kahn."
"Why?" Gokon said. "So you can feed him one of your celestial readings."
Dak tried once more to break free, but the Mongol who had him was strong. It didn't even work to kick or stomp the guy's feet. How was it that just hours ago they'd seemed so close to victory, but now they perched at the edge of losing it all? Dak looked at Sera. She was crying, and he knew why. Losing it all meant something more to her. He had to do something for her. Gokon was trying to get away with something without Hulagu's knowledge, so Dak had to get the Khan's attention. He only hoped the warlord was close by. Dak sucked in a deep breath. "Great Hulagu Kahn!" His shout echoed in the small room, as loud as he could make it. "Great Hulagu Kahn!"
"Silence him!"
Gokon hissed. The guard holding Dak tried to cover his mouth, but Dak just bit his hand and got one more shout off. "Great Hulagu Kahn!" And then Sera took up the cry too, screaming in her higher-pitched voice, "Hulagu! Great Hulagu Kahn!" Gokon's face twisted up with rage, and he pulled his sword free of its scabbard. Dak gulped. He didn't think the general would actually kill them right here, but then again, he might. Tusi took a step backward and laughed out loud. Then he too shouted, "My Kahn! Your people need you, Great Kahn!" Gokon spun on him. "Now you've gone too far!" He raised his sword. "No!" Sera cried. Tusi lifted his head high. "I see now I have not gone far enough."
"So be it."
Gokon brought the blade down.
"Halt!"
The walls seemed to reverberate with the force of the command. Hulagu stood in the doorway. Dak's eyes leapt from the warlord back to Tusi and Gokon. The general's sword hung poised in the air, mid-strike, inches from Tusi's neck.
"Sheathe that sword,"
Hulagu said. Gokon lowered his blade and drove it hard into its scabbard.
"What goes on here?"
Hulagu asked.
"Tusi and these children conspire against you, Great Kahn," the general said. "I came to stop them."
"That is not true," Tusi said. "Great Kahn, it is your general who has betrayed your trust. He intended harm to these children, even though you had placed them under your protection." "Only as I awaited your reading," Hulagu said. Tusi bowed his head. "Yes, of course. Have you completed your reading of the stars?" Hulagu asked. "I have," Tusi said. "They tell me—"
"Do not trust him, Great Kahn,"
the general said.
He means to bend your will to his."
"That is not true," Tusi shouted.
"Silence!"
Hulagu held up both hands. Then he turned to Dak and Sera.
"Perhaps it is time I allow these unexpected visitors to speak to me themselves."
He looked up at the guy holding Dak.
"Release them."
The warrior let Dak out of his grip. The Mongol standing next to Dak released Sera at the same time. "Thank you, Great Kahn," Dak said.
"I have little patience, boy," Hulagu said. "Why have you come here? How is it you found your way so close to my throne without my permission?"
"How we came here is a very long story," Sera said. "But why we have come is very, very important, Great Kahn."
"Then tell me."
Hulagu folded his arms.
"Quickly, my patience comes to an end."
Sera looked at Dak. The moment had arrived. The very thing they decided they needed to do from the beginning. Hulagu had to be convinced, and Dak thought he knew how. It came back to a question Rick had raised on the road to Baghdad. Why did Dak like history so much? "Great Kahn," Dak said, "this world is a pretty uncertain place. Most events are completely unpredictable. Sometimes it's confusing, and it's hard to know what's going on. I don't like not knowing what's going on. I like to understand things. I use history to help me do that. It's written. It's settled. It happened, and that's that. It can help me make sense of things in the present." Hulagu looked a bit confused, but he said,
"Go on."
"You look to the stars for that, right? The heavens are fixed up there. They move across the sky in the same paths, night after night, year after year. You look up to help you know what to do, to help you figure things out, right?" Hulagu looked at Tusi.
"With the aid of learned men, yes."
"Well," Dak said, "we've come from a distant land with a message for you."
"Who sent you?"
Hulagu asked. "Learned men," Sera said.
"And the message?"
Hulagu asked. "You need to build an observatory," Dak said. "A place where your learned men can study the stars and give you the best advice." Hulagu turned to Tusi.
"Well, what do you make of these?"
"I am in agreement, Great Kahn. I would be a much better advisor to you if I had a place dedicated to observing the heavens, a true observatory."
"And where would this observatory be located?"
Hulagu asked. "A favorable site would need to be found, but I believe the mountains of Marageh would be ideal."
"I see," Hulagu said.
"I offer myself, Great Kahn," Tusi said. "I will direct this observatory to your greater glory, to your long life, and to the legacy of your empire." Dak watched Tusi and had to agree with what Gokon had said. The man was a survivor. Tusi would probably come out of this just fine, and it looked like Hulagu was coming around to the idea.
"This proposal appeals to me," Hulagu said.
"The construction will be costly," Tusi said. "To offset the expense to you, might I offer an additional thought?"
"You may," Hulagu said.
"Now that Baghdad has fallen," Tusi said, "the fruits of its many libraries belong to you and are ripe for plucking, and an observatory under your patronage, the greatest the world has known, should also have a library of great renown." Dak waited. This was the moment. Right here. History was about to be rewritten. Suddenly, that thought struck Dak in a way it never had before, and he felt like he'd been tipped on his side. Everything was off kilter. He'd finally realized what history meant to him, and now that was being taken away from him. History wasn't settled. Not at all. And Dak was unsettling it. But without history, what else could he rely on? Hulagu turned to Gokon.
"What do you have to say?"
Gokon quivered with rage. "Your men have fought valiantly for a share of the riches of Baghdad."
"Books?" Hulagu snorted. "My men do not expect books."
Gokon's mouth snapped shut.
"Can you see any objection to this observatory?"
Hulagu asked the general. Gokon was in a very dangerous spot. Dak could see that. Hulagu looked to have made up his mind. If the general raised no objection, he failed the SQ, and the break would be fixed. But if he objected, he risked the Khan's wrath. Dak waited anxiously to see what the Time Warden would do, and where his true loyalties lay.
"I do not think this is a wise course," Gokon said.
Hulagu scowled.
"Then you are not in harmony with me, and you raised your sword against my advisor. For this, you will be imprisoned for a time, until I decide what judgment best falls upon you."
Hulagu then ordered the two warriors to take Gokon into custody. The general didn't look so divine anymore. He'd finally been defeated. He surrendered his sword and went with the warriors without putting up a fight, and without making eye contact with anyone in the room. After he was gone, Hulagu said,
"My general does make one good point. My men are restless. They hunger for destruction."
"I only need a few days," Tusi said.
"Once the Caliph has surrendered," Hulagu said, "I can hold my men back for 3 days. That is all the time you have to pick your fruit."
Chapter 20. Buried Treasure. Rick waited at the House of Wisdom with Abi for days, with no word or sign from Dak and Sera. Many, many times he wanted to go after them, but Abi wouldn't allow it. He said Rick had to safeguard the Infinity Ring, and that meant he couldn't take it anywhere near Gokon. Rick thought he could just leave it behind at the House of Wisdom, but Abi insisted that was too risky. In the end, Rick reluctantly agreed with that reasoning. But he was going pretty crazy, wondering what was going on, and feeling pretty helpless. He paced a lot, and he knew a big part of his fear was about what would happen once they finished this break. He spent hours holding the Infinity Ring, just staring at it. This device had the power to erase him. On the 7th day of the siege, the sounds of battle ceased, and Rick walked to a secluded room and sat down, the Infinity Ring in his lap. He tried really hard to believe that Sera and Dak were safe, that they would come soon. "I'm certain they are well." Rick looked up. Abi had come into the room. "I know," Rick said. "But that is not the only thing troubling you, is it?" "No," Rick said. "What else?" Abi asked. It felt easier to think of telling Abi about it than it did Sera and Dak. "I messed with my own timeline. I'm not sure I exist anymore." "Of course you exist," Abi said. "You affirm that just by asking the question." "No," Rick said. "I exist here because we're still in a kind of warp. Dak and Sera and I are slipping through time, and we're not affected yet by what we're doing. But the world we left behind is being affected by everything we do. And when I go back there, I don't know what will happen. I could disappear like I'd never even been there." Abi was silent. "That is a heavy burden." Rick had to laugh. "Yeah, pretty heavy." "What will you do?" "I don't know." Rick rolled the Infinity Ring over. "I've thought about just staying in the past somewhere. I almost did that recently." The image of Kisa came into his mind. How happy he'd been with her. The way she'd felt to him, like she filled a remnant. "What made you change your mind?" "I have a mission. I have a responsibility. And I want to honor the sacrifices made by others to get us to this point." "That is very noble," Abi said. "Thanks." "What else could you do?" Abi asked. Rick shook his head. He frowned.
just go back? See what happens? Or not see what happens?
I don't understand time travel, Abi said. But let me ask you this. Are you only a product of the past, or are you something more? Are you not also the decisions you make right now in the present? That was a pretty deep question, but it seemed important.
I guess I'm kind of both.
Exactly, Abi said. I believe that even if your past is erased, there is still the part of you that is here, right now, being true and noble, worrying about your friends and seeking to honor them. That makes you real to me.
A knot formed in Rick's throat. He swallowed. Thanks, Abi. The next morning, Rick was standing in the courtyard of the House of Wisdom when Dak, Sera, and Tusi walked through the front doors. He laughed and ran toward them, and the 3 time travelers hugged. There was so much to talk about, but no time. Dak and Sera explained that Hulagu had only given them a few days to save the books in the House of Wisdom. The Caliph will surrender in 4 days, Dak said. Hulagu said he would hold his men off for 3 days after that. I'm not certain how you know that about the Caliph, Tusi said. But I believe you. And that means I have a week to save what I can. Abi stepped forward. I'll be happy to assist you. I'm very familiar with the most important volumes in the House of Wisdom. He looked at Rick, Sera, and Dak with a smile. Rick knew what he meant. Those most important volumes being those written by Aristotle about the Great Breaks. It seemed they had succeeded. The Time Wardens had been defeated. The break was fixed. We did it, he said.
Did you?
Came a familiar voice. Rick turned to see the market inspector standing at the entrance, with 6 guards at his side. Each of them held a burning torch in his hand, and Rick realized with horror what they planned to do. One way or another, the library would be destroyed, if not by the Mongols, then by the SQ themselves. How dare you? Tusi said. Hulagu Kahn has placed this library under his protection. The market inspector spread his arms.
Is he here to protect it? Because all I see are a few children and 2 scholars.
Perhaps that's all we need, Abi said. Tusi, historians, come with me.
They all backed away from the guards, and the market inspector laughed.
Run! Run away! Meanwhile, we'll torch this place room by room.
His guards scattered in different directions, and soon flames began to appear in all the doorways around the courtyard. How many books were burning right now? How much knowledge had just been lost in an instant? Rick raged inside, but there wasn't anything he could do. Come, Abi said. Follow me. He led them deep into the House of Wisdom, through doorways and down hallways Rick had never seen. They eventually took a flight of steps downward and came to a room with a lock on the door. It was a very peculiar lock, with several spinning brass dials filled with scrolling Arabic letters. Abi rotated the dials. An invention of the Banu Musa brothers. You have to know the secret word to unlock it. A moment later, the dials clicked into place, and the door opened. Go, go! Rick smiled. Open sesame. Inside, they found a small room with earthen walls, almost a cave, with another door on the opposite side. Several chests sat in the middle of the floor. These contain the works of Aristotle, Abi said. I gathered them together when you historians first arrived against the day we might need to move them. We must take these now. But the House of Wisdom, Dak said. There is nothing we can do, Abi said. But these books must survive, and there are many other libraries in Baghdad with hundreds of thousands of books. Tusi and I will save as many as we can before the Mongols begin their destruction, and we will see that they are copied so that these words may spread to many libraries in many lands. Rick thought about what Abi was saying and realized he was right. This was now the only way. Maybe it had been all along. The important thing was that they would now be able to fix the prime break because the works of Aristotle would survive in a new library. It was like that riddle they'd solved at the beginning. This small room was a cave of wonders, and these chests contained history's light. "Let's go," he said. Hobbie opened the other door, which led them outside the House of Wisdom, down by the river. A small boat waited there, and they loaded the chests of books into it. Then Hobbie and Tussi climbed aboard, and Hobbie used the oars to slide them out into the river's current. "Wait!" Tussi said. "What about the children?" "They have a very special boat of their own," Hobbie said, smiling. "One that sails backward up the river." Rick, Sara, and Dak waved at the two scholars. Hobbie's grin never fell as he waved back. But Tussi simply looked completely confused. Once the scholars were safely away from the House of Wisdom, Sara pulled the square back out. "New coordinates," she said. "Give me the ring." Rick handed it over to her. As she punched in the data, he looked up at the smoke rising into the air from within the House of Wisdom, the ashes carried over their heads into the river. The destruction of Baghdad had begun. But it would not be a complete destruction, not anymore. Many of its books, its wisdom and knowledge, would survive. "Ready," Sara said. The three of them took hold of the infinity ring. As the device hummed in his hand, and the world began to shimmer and break apart in a shower of sparks, Rick thought back to what Hobbie had said. Rick was making choices. Now. That had to count for something. Epilogue. Sara blinked. The smoke and the burning House of Wisdom were gone, but they were still standing on the banks of a wide river. This was clearly not the Tigris, though. This river was lined with green trees. It was summer here, and the warm, humid air stuck to Sara's skin. Insects buzzed around them, and frogs croaked from the mud. "Where are we?" Dak asked. "What river is this?" Sara checked the square. "The Mississippi. It's the summer of 1804. 1804? Dak got that familiar look in his eye. Sara smiled. "Yes, 1804. She glanced at Rick, who seemed ready to shut Dak down. But since she and Dak had talked back in Hulagu's palace, she found she wasn't so bothered by Dak's enthusiasm. "Please tell us about 1804. "Well," Dak cleared his throat, "that was the year the Louisiana expedition left from St. Louis." Right. Sara remembered something about that from school. "Go on." Dak beamed. "President Jefferson had just acquired the Louisiana Purchase, which was this huge territory of land. He basically doubled the size of the United States, but he didn't really know what was out there, so he sent an expedition to explore. They were supposed to travel along the Missouri River and find a route to the Pacific Ocean." "Supposed to?" Rick echoed. "Yeah," Dak said. "But it was a complete disaster. Nobody made it back alive." The three of them looked at one another. It was another life-or-death situation, this time in the wilderness, far from the comforts of anything like the House of Wisdom. Dak continued. "What happened to the expedition is a mystery. Jefferson believed all kinds of crazy rumors about the West. He thought there were mammoths out there, and volcanoes, and mountains made of salt." "Mammoths have been extinct for more than 4,000 years at this point," Sara said. "Yup," Dak said. "We know that now, but when the explorers failed to return, nobody knew what to believe. All they could say for sure was that the territory was dangerous. It was declared off-limits for decades. Jefferson was disgraced because he'd spent all this money. The country was mad at him, and he only served one term as president." Dak paused. "What is it?" Sara asked. "It's just..." Dak's eyebrows creased together. He looked worried. "I have to remember to question everything now. Everything I thought I knew about history." "Like what?" Rick asked. "Like the Louisiana expedition." What if it wasn't simply a failure? What if it was sabotaged? What if the SQ got involved and they ruined Jefferson's reputation on purpose? Doesn't that seem like something they would do? Sara looked out over the smooth river flowing past. That seems exactly like something they would do. There should be a fort somewhere around here, Dax said. Camp Wood. It's where the expedition really got started, on the outskirts of St. Louis. I entered the coordinates carefully, Sara said. It has to be close. Then that's where we should begin, Rick said. Let's look around. Just, be on the lookout for bears. They started up the bank of the river, moving slowly through the trees and the underbrush. Birds skimmed the water and sang from the branches overhead. Sara had to admit, after the desert, it was nice to be in a place that was so full of life, even if some of it wanted to eat her. They hadn't gone very far when Rick held up his hand to stop them. He pointed ahead, and through the trees, Sara glimpsed the log wall of a fort in the distance. It looked just like the paintings she had seen of the American frontier. Tall tree trunks stood tightly together, sharpened at the top like a row of gigantic pencils. I think that's Camp Wood, Dak whispered. He motioned toward a cluster of cabins and cottages that stood between them and the fort. And this must be St. Louis. It's a total frontier town in this era. It's the edge of civilization, as far as the Americans of the time are concerned. Something about the place felt sinister to Sara. Do you think there are any time wardens this far west? It's definitely possible, Dak said. If the SQ sabotaged the expedition, they probably have an agent here, unless he's on the road with Lewis and Clark. Rick turned to Dak. Lewis and Clark? Right, Dak said. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Jefferson put them in charge of the expedition. They were last seen leaving Camp Wood. Rick smirked. What do you want to bet the break has something to do with helping these Lewis and Clark guys? Sara had the same thought. It was getting to the point where she could tell when something was wrong. She could almost feel it in her gut, as if she was becoming a real historian with real historian instincts. I bet you're right, Dak said. But the expedition left weeks ago. Then we have some catching up to do, Rick said. A journey into the wild American frontier sounded exciting to Sara, but no matter what anyone said, she was not going to wear a dress. And then she saw something that chilled her blood. It was carved into the wooden homes before them. It was stitched into flags and sacks of dry goods. The symbol of the SQ was everywhere. The SQ didn't just have an agent in St. Louis. They controlled the entire town. This is Deon Graham. We hope that you have enjoyed this production of Infinity Ring, Book 5, Cave of Wonders, by Matthew J. Kirby. This program was produced and directed by Scott Sherrod. Executive producer Paul R. Gagney. Post-production by John Van Horn. Recorded by Alan Tobin. Original music by Susan Jane. Text and production copyright 2013 by Scholastic, Inc. All rights reserved.